We're back with Cancer and Peace, episode 2. My name is Sean Stewart, and I'm facilitating the conversation with our host, Peter Scalzo. If you missed episode 1, Peter put out his extensive resume of a 17-year cancer journey and all the places it's taken him, from speaking to writing a book about his experience, his website, and just sharing in his 16 years of managing a cancer support group. Just a lot of wisdom and understanding of his inner journey. And today we're going to go a little bit further. We're going to talk about that journey a little bit. Peter's going to start us out back in 2005 when he got his first cancer diagnosis. And we're going to run forward to what I think he will describe as probably his most traumatic event in his cancer journey for him personally, and what happened inside of himself between those two. And so we'll jump around a little bit. And for those of you 60-year-old single women out there, I'm sorry, we are going to have a little bit of fun on this podcast. Peter's still single right now, and so all the guys are all laughing here. We're going to have fun with this podcast too. And so because he's not creepy, I don't want any 20-year-olds or anything like that. So we do want to have fun, right? And so I say that because I want you to know
expense.
When we talk about stuff behind the scenes, we're always having a good time joking around a little bit. And so this isn't just a serious... We must talk about, all the things being straight and level here. So, but Peter, take us back to 2005. And
just to camp on that too, Sean. So my cancer journey, I've had many humorous moments, and I tend to be a guy that enjoys humor and having fun. And so maybe at some point we'll share some of those humorous stories, because there's a lot of them.
My favorite, you're going to share. I'm going to force you to share at some point in time my favorite, and it's going to be you learning how to pee again.
Yeah.
And so that will be a great story for everyone to hear, but after surgery. But let's go to 2005 today.
Yeah, so I think that, and of course, I checked the 2020 census, over 600,000 people in the United States passed from cancer. I didn't check to see how many people get diagnosed, but between cancer and heart disease, these are the two major causes of death in the United States. Cancer treatment has come a long way, but there are people getting diagnosed with cancer every few minutes, and family members. I think, in the past when I was growing up, you barely knew anyone who was dealing with cancer, or at least they were quiet about it. No one talked about it. In fact, I had a grandfather that passed from cancer, and the doctor never told him he even had cancer. Told his wife, but not him.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so it was this taboo kind of thing, and so now, like in 2005, when I was diagnosed with cancer, so everyone is in the context of their lives, and no one is expecting to be hijacked by a cancer diagnosis. It is an identity change. It's a surreal identity change to have an expert say, "Oh, you have cancer." That is a shock to the system, to physically, emotionally, to your soul, everything. And for me, in 2005, I was already dealing with the terminal cancer of my mom. In fact, she passed. My first major surgery was July 27th at Memorial Sloan. She passed October 10th of that same year at the age of 70 from ovarian cancer. And Mom and I were very close. I'm the youngest of 4 children. She called me her baby, even into it was embarrassing. I won't say how old I was. My brothers and sisters were always mad at me. They said that I was the spoiled one, which is probably right. But she was a safe person for me. In fact, when I was recovering from my surgery, I did some of that recovery with her because she was home, and we would just sit and talk. Those were precious times of talking about our lives, and I was able to honor her with a letter saying how much I appreciated and loved her as a mom. Really just a tremendous, wonderful mom. But when I got my own cancer diagnosis, I was very busy with my law practice with 6 children and my marriage and everything else I was involved in. A lot of community involvement, ministry involvement. I was part of a busy church and very active in that church. And so I remember being in the doctor's office and he coming in scratching his head which you don't want to see your doctor scratching his head.
That's
Not
the
a
first
good
sign. Is when they're
Yeah.
scratching their head, there's a problem.
He said, "Are you sure you haven't smoked before?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, I don't know how to tell you this, but you have high-grade urothelial cancer, which is a really tough cancer. If it breaches the bladder wall, as my Sloan Kettering surgeon said, usually you last about 6 months. Now, that's different now with some immunotherapy drugs that have been showing promise. But back then, the chemotherapy treatments didn't really work well on this tumor, on this cancer. And so the doctor gave me the news, and I immediately thought I was going to throw up. And that's where I really feel stress a lot of times in my gastrointestinal system. And I had to lie down. He said, "You're turning green." And I had to lie down because to me, my life flashed before my eyes. And I thought, well, how is this going to work? And I thought, I'm too young to die. I immediately went to fear of death, fear of how it's all going to work. I didn't think about financially how I would do it if I was out of work for a long time. I was dealing with the shock and the trauma of, hey, one day you're a healthy guy or you might not feel well, and the next moment you are a cancer patient with a tough cancer cell. I remember walking outside the doctor's office, sitting on the curb, calling my mom, because she would have been the person that I would have talked to. My wife was with me, and just crying. And I remember saying, "I'm just too young to die." And she said, "Well, let's deal with this one moment at a time, one day at a time." And so then, I went through the process of a surgery. It was a surgical procedure locally with that particular urologist, and it didn't go well. So I ended up down at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, did another surgical procedure with him where they go in and basically scrape the cancer out of the bladder. And the cancer had grown in 2 weeks. And so I remember my surgeon taking the scope out, and he started to walk away from me, and I grabbed his coat. And the only thing I could say is, "Would you be my doctor?" There was something inside of me, which I believe was God, that I had heard Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center ads, and I said to myself, man, if I'm ever diagnosed with cancer, I'm going down there. I just had this certain peace and sort of a trust that was a place that did well with cancer. And as it turned out, the local doctor, the local hospital maybe performed one of the surgeries in a year that I needed to get, whereas Memorial Sloan did hundreds of them through the year and had an extensive urology department. Because essentially the remedy was to remove, as I said, the bladder, prostate, parts of the ureter, and cut the ileum part of the small intestine and use those parts to replace the bladder and this ureter section and stuff. So it's quite an extensive surgery and involves a lot of recovery and different ways to go to the bathroom and had all kinds of collateral damage with it. And so I had a couple more surgeries with him related to that. And roughly 2010, my CAT scans were not coming back well. And my doctor at Sloan Kettering said, "You know what? We can't handle what needs to be done inside of you here, but I'm going to send you to a guy that he's an endourologist. He deals only with these fine issues in the urology system." So I went over to Lenox Hill Hospital. He thought I had cancer, and same incision. It's about a 14-inch incision from the pubic bone on up. It's a vertical incision past the belly button all the way up. He cut the same way, redid my sections of my bladder, my ureters, redid them. We found an inflamed appendix attached to my anastomosis, which is this area of the tissues that are joined together. So he basically took that out and took him, he said, 5 minutes to take the appendix out, but I was down there 27 days. And what happened with me is my intestines would never open up, and I would lose 30, 40 pounds and just be in the hospital that whole time waiting for my intestines. And if anyone's ever had that, I had the NG tube and all, I had a gastric bypass, just all this other tube in my stomach, all these tubes to try to get the system to flow. But my point in all this is that I had surgical solutions always.
I want to go back to for a second. So this is good. Well, first I have to know. So is it a requirement if you're a cancer patient that you have to learn all those fancy names? And because you're talking with terms and stuff, is that a requirement? But that's
No,
me just joking
not
around.
at all. Yeah, not at all. Thank
all
God.
right, that's the legal thing of you coming out. I don't know, something weird like that. But I want to go back to 2005 for just a second.
Yeah.
Because I'm interested in how you talked about immediate feelings of fear, because you said, I don't want to die, I'm too young to die.
Yeah.
What did you do with those emotions to start with?
Yes,
because I think this is a common thing. Is like, what did you do with those emotions? Because what you're getting ready to share, where you're going to, is you're going to share that coming back again and where you started going. But what did you do to start with those emotions?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I had been a feeling stuffer my whole life. Emotions were not really encouraged in my home, in the sense of being vulnerable and crying and transparent, that kind of thing. And I remember when I was young, my dad called me the sensitive one, which was probably true. I was a little bit more sensitive, would cry easily. And I remember being a young boy making a determination, I mean a solid decision. I will never show emotions. No one will ever see me cry. That's what I meant by that. I could be angry, but I basically tried to turn the volume off on my emotional life.
So your family of origin taught you that showing emotions was showing weakness, and you didn't want to be weak. Is that a fair?
Yeah, I think that's probably right, and yeah, I think that's fair thing to say.
And so you were carrying that that narrative, that belief into this first cancer diagnosis. And when you heard that story, you were like, I don't want to die. You felt fear.
Right.
And that tendency to want to stuff came up.
Yes. And so it's interesting the way the nervous system and the body responds, because I had no outlet for it. So immediately I had the body sensation of the gut, the gastrointestinal problems, all of a sudden my back hurt, because I didn't have a release. I didn't know of a way where I could express it and basically release what was going on. So I had the body issues. My body was going through what it was going through, and that gut issue, stomach, intestinal issue, had been something that's been, whenever I had anxiety through my life, that was the key thing that showed up within my body. And
this is going to be a theme in the podcast, and something that Pete Scazzero talks about in Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. And it's this concept that your body is a major prophet, not a minor prophet.
Yeah.
And so what you're describing right now is that your body knew.
Yeah.
Your body felt the trauma, and whether or not you had the ability to emotionally and mentally process this in a healthy way, your body was already feeling it, and you knew it.
Yeah.
And so it's something that we'll want to talk about as one of the tools that you can use is when you get connected with your body in a big way, and how it's signaling to you what's going on, that you can use that and you can support your body, and you can become much more healthy by listening to it in that way and understanding what's going on.
So the fear, doubt, and uncertainty that happened to me with a cancer diagnosis, what I did was basically I turned to people that were very supportive of me, for instance, Mom and my wife and people like that. And they had encouraging words, reassuring words, but also it helped me to research, to think it, to fill my mind with I'm an attorney, so I thought, well, I'll research this thing and that'll resolve it. I'll get peace through my research. And the doctor reassured me because the only thing he said was, hey, we can go for the cure here. He said, I don't know if, even though I had a CAT scan, PET scan, he said, I don't know if it's breached the bladder wall. If it's breached the bladder wall, then all bets are off. You'll be dead within 6 months. So I had that kind of outward, maybe not too much of a risk thing because everything was pointing to the fact that we had caught it early enough where it was confined to the bladder and confined to the urinary system. So
what you're sharing is a bit about there was hope.
Yes.
A hope in a medical solution.
Yes.
And that's part of what propelled you forward.
Yes. And each time I had my surgical solutions up until 2015, the 14th one, I went in with that hope. And that's an important point for me, Sean, what you're making, because, and we don't have to get into it now, but in that 14th surgery, the medical part was gone. Everything medically said, we're done here. I had gone to the point of no return. It
Right.
was, it's metastatic. It's all over. We're done. Sloan is advising for you to go home and call hospice. And I knew from my research, and this is key because, the research part of me, that metastatic urothelial cancer at that point had a 5% survival rate for 5 years. So I knew that I had 5% survival rate. Well, I had a 95% chance to pass.
Yeah. This is big, though, because I think you're speaking to something when you first get your cancer diagnosis about where your hope come from, and you really understood how to process that emotionally. And I think, I guess I'm just thinking out loud here, and is how much of our lives are based on false hope, because I think your journey is getting to real hope that had nothing to do with success or failure or medical solutions, is that real hope comes from a different source than that. It's kind of a lot of where you're going with this podcast.
Yeah, in this 14th surgery, 2015, we exhausted any medical solution. We were done. There was nothing else.
Right.
So any hope or peace that I could have gotten with, okay, the medical community is going to fix me, it was gone.
Describe that if you want. I think that'd be really...
I'll go into this 10-hour surgery with 3 surgeons and them stopping. They have 50 years of experience and down in Lenox Hill in Manhattan, and them stopping at one point, looking at each other and saying, what do we do next? And I woke up with plumbing drawings next to my pillow in permanent marker where they were trying to figure out the plumbing, what to do with all these tumors wrapped around my aorta, tumors all throughout my ureters, tumors all throughout the region. What do we do?
They wrote on the pillow, right?
Yeah.
And so
permanent marker.
It wasn't next to your pillow. They wrote on permanent
Right
marker on the pillow.
Yeah.
They drew out what they were doing for the surgery, which is...
Yeah. And I had a 10-hour surgery, and my top surgeon, who I love, he's a great guy. One of the best, but very direct and very honest. And he came in and he said, it's not good. And he started to explain it, and I plummeted into a place of darkness and despair. Anything that I had put my hope in before didn't work.
Your medical hope had been crushed.
It didn't work, yep.
And now you were at a place of really a dark place.
And no, if those same people came in to say to me, oh, everything's going to be fine, no.
You knew that was false hope.
And, and I was part of I haven't introduced my relationship with God yet in this podcast, but my higher power, as I like to say, because of recovery is so much a part of my life, is Jesus Christ. I know that may turn off some people, but that's where I find power and peace and joy in my relationship with my higher power, Jesus Christ. And so we'll go into what that looks like. But I think having a spiritual program along with the emotional program, is really important for getting to that place of inner peace. And so when he gave me this news and people had prayed for me and told me, God said, you're going to be fine. He's going to heal you. This is not going to be an issue. All those words fell flat. And I shook my fist and I said, you liars. And I shook my fist at the Lord and I said, you have abandoned me in this place. And it was just, it makes me cry even now, but it's just such a place of utter devastation. I don't know how to describe it other than that.
John on the Cross calls it the dark night of the soul.
Yeah.
And I think there's something big there that you were going into as a spiritual experience. But we both know in our recovery journeys that this is where God does his greatest work in us, is at that dark night. And I think you're going to save a big part of this journey for a later podcast on the journey through the wall and the dark night of the soul. But you came a long ways in your emotional journey, and you've got to emotional devastation. The hardest part of your cancer journey was when all of the hope that you had built up into had been crushed.
Yes.
And there you were in that place.
So therefore, no hope, no peace, no joy, none of that, replaced with an incredibly deep fear, anger, and sadness. That's it. My life is over.
And you wanted nobody to be around you.
No visitors. I told the hospital staff, and I was in ICU for no visitors. And my son Paul, my kids made a decision in 2015 to come into the hospital with me for every surgery and stay with me 24/7. They took turns.
Is that because they knew you needed that level of support and they felt like, or tell me,
I never asked for it, but it was their way of loving on their dad.
Yeah.
And there were times in the hospital where it's hard for me to talk about it, but we wouldn't be saying anything, but my child would be sitting next to me. And it was this feeling of like being at home, almost like, and that kind of contentment that comes with just hanging out with your loved one. And it was, even though we were in this medical setting with all of the interruptions and hooked up to all the stuff, there was a tremendous amount of comfort that came from that. But none of that at first in 2015, but my son stayed with me and played hymns and read scriptures. And I was like, I didn't say anything to him, but I was quiet. I couldn't pray. No way. I wasn't in a place to pray.
So I want to leave people with this spot here a little bit, and that is we're having this conversation 7+ years after that event, or that major point, this dark night of the soul. And that wasn't the only dark night that you had to go through. There were other events that happened in your life that happened over the next 7 years also, which were additional trauma.
Yep.
But you're sitting here today speaking about peace.
Right.
And so a lot of this podcast is going to be sharing more of that journey. But I'm hoping our listeners just have a little bit of a taste of what this journey is about and why you're wanting to share your life. And I think there's so much overlap. I think you're not unique in one sense. Is every one of us have a dark night of the soul.
Absolutely.
Every one of us have a story that we live in. And every one of us have our story crushed, our narrative crushed in some manner. And so you're not here out of pride saying, I did it. You're here saying, here's my story.
Yeah.
And there's probably some things you can find in your story, people can find in your story that is meaningful for their own, that there's overlap and hope in the midst of that.
I mean, no matter what kind of a journey you or your loved one takes, the cancer diagnosis itself is devastating. And then however that pathway goes. And so we have choices to make in that journey. And I will say this, that place of devastation that I was in, that abyss that I call it, that there was a way out. Even though my medical diagnosis and prognosis didn't change, I did inside.
But you didn't know it at the time.
I did not
and
know it.
That's what's fascinating about your story. So that's
Yep.
going to pick up
Yeah.
in later episodes here.
Yep.
We're going to share that. I want to share a concept you and I both have connected from recovery. I shared that in the first podcast. And one of the things about recovery that both of us have connected with deeply is, and we call it the power of testimony, is when you hear somebody else tell their story, their testimony, we'll call it, there's something deeply connecting. And so their story is unique to them. But in the midst of that, you find, or I found, and I know that you found the same thing, is that there's something that you relate to in that story. There's an overlap. And that's really a lot of what this podcast is going to be about, is that people are going to hear and find the overlap in their story with your story. And they're going to realize and learn things about themselves, because that's what we did in recovery, is that the more I heard about other people's brokenness, the more I got in touch with my own character defects and brokenness. And the more I heard about their healing and how they found healing in that journey of brokenness, the more I learned what the path was to find healing in my own brokenness. And so that's what we're doing in this podcast. You and I having conversations in that space.
Yeah.
And we're going to complete this episode here. We're going to call it a wrap. But go to cancerandpeace.com and you can see more of Peter's resources. His Cancer and Peace book is out there and many other resources. And if you just want to reach out, that's the place to go. And tune in for further episodes. And we're going to have a lot of fun here.
Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, Peter.